Let's go ahead and get the meeting started. We'll begin with the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have the minutes of the October 10th, 2023 meeting in the packet. It was online. Are there any additions, corrections, or comments on those minutes? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Second. Kay makes the motion, and Mr. Tobel did the second. Any other comments? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any public comment today on any agenda item? Nobody signed in, but I'll still take public comment if anybody wants to make one. Seeing none, we'll proceed with introductions. I'm Kevin Breisky. I'm Porter County Surveyor and Chairman of this group.
Tom Vanderwood, nurses staff.
Flora Baum, Nurse staff.
Kay Nelson, Northwest Indiana Forum.
Kelly Wanger, Nixie. Julie Richler for Lisa Schrader, UDOT.
George Topple, Union Township, Porter County.
Max Raylander, Valparaiso City Engineer.
Beth Schrader, Valpo Transit.
Kevin.
Kevin Foley, Energy Staff.
Scott Pruitt, District Engineer.
William Allen, City Engineering, Chicago. Jake Dammer, on Public Pyramid and Soccer.
Tom Schmidt with the Sherrill Town Council.
Jeff Hewitt, Sherrville.
Charles Bransky, Nermsey.
Scott Lover, Nermsey.
Stephen Hughes, Nermsey.
Ann Wymanot, Nurse. Jen Birchfield, Nurse. Grace Bendemeyer, Nurse.
Thank you all for attending. This just helps our secretary keep attendance and acknowledge the fact that you're here for your bosses and for the rest of us. So we'll move on to the schedule. We have planning 3.1, Northwest Indiana 2050 plus freight presentation. Mr. Weber, thank you. This is informational.
Yep. So as we've been doing the last several TPC meetings, we've been going through the chapters of our NWI 2050 Plus, which the Commission adopted in July. And so this time it is the turn of the freight chapter, and I will briefly present an informational item about what our freight chapter looks like in NWI 2050 Plus. It's chapter 4, and freight is an important topic in our region. I want to acknowledge that in producing this freight chapter, we were led by the consultant CPCS, and we had a steering committee of these individuals. I'm not going to go through all of these in the interest of time, but I want to acknowledge Kay, who's here, Kay Nelson, who was part of this committee, and of course, Kevin Fleet was a big part of our help as well. There's too many to thank on University staff that have gone into this effort. So what is the structure of the freight chapter? We start with the finding meaning. And so I'll talk about the freight-related economy in Northwest Indiana, as well as the multimodal freight system in our region and the issues and needs. And then we kind of pivot into the creating purpose portion of the chapter, which goes into the vision, goals, and objectives, and the freight performance measures. And finally, the purpose-driven planning section of the chapter, which goes into the policy study and research recommendations and freight project gap areas, which I'll be touching on in this presentation. So let's start with talking about the economy. We know that freight is a very important aspect of the economy in Northwest Indiana. As you can see, freight-dependent industries comprise about 37.4% of the employment in our region, and that's broken down into construction, manufacturing, wholesale trade, retail trade, transportation, and warehousing, and a little bit of agriculture as well, farm. And when it comes to the wealth that freight-related industries generate in our region, it's actually 52.2%. So they generate more wealth than they employ, as you can see. And manufacturing in particular generates a lot more wealth in terms of GDP than it employs. It generates about 32.4% of the wealth measured by GDP. Retail trade, despite comprising over 12% of the employment, only generates about 6.9% of the wealth measured by GDP. Also, we know that transportation and warehousing in particular has actually grown in significance quite a bit in our economy. This is a shift share analysis that shows that transportation and warehousing is actually the most competitive in our area among the freight-related industries. And as you look at this table here, in the bottom row, transportation and warehousing was actually the only sector of freight-related employment in the last 10 years that actually outpaced the nation as a whole in our region. We grew by 46.4% in terms of employment, whereas the U.S. as a whole only grew by 37.4% in employment. All the other sectors of the freight-dependent industries, including manufacturing, actually grew slower in our region than in the country as a whole. So we know transportation warehousing is a huge component of our economy. Now I'm going to talk about the multimodal freight system in Northwest Indiana. We know we have a lot of just freight infrastructure out there. We have 227 miles of interstate, 558 miles of U.S. state highways, 930 miles of rails, 997 bridges, 7 public airports, 4 maritime ports, and 772 miles of pipeline. That's a lot. And looking at all the modes and how they comprise both the tonnage and the value moved in our region, the truck mode is dominant in terms of the value at 54%. It's actually in second place to pipeline in terms of tonnage. In 2017, it was only 35%, and pipeline was 38.1%. However, in looking at the projections in 2050, the truck mode is actually expected to grow quite a bit, whereas the pipeline mode is supposed to pretty much flatline in terms of tonnage. And also, it's worth noting that rail is expected to also decline slightly from 2017 to 2050. This is largely driven just by coal and stuff. So anyway, it's an interesting picture of all the modes that move freight in our region. Looking at kind of the maps of all these modes in our region, this shows the truck mode in terms of the truck volume by truck AADT in each of the major highways in our region. We all kind of see where those trucks are on a daily basis, and obviously we see a lot on interstate like I-8094 and the Indiana Toll Road and I-65. Those are interstates; those are the darkest. But clearly trucks are very important to our region. Looking at the rail modes, we have a lot of Class 1 rail roads as well as short line railroads, as shown on this map, running across our region. And we have some transload facilities as well in the Hammond and East Chicago areas. Looking at our maritime system, we have, as shown here, we have 3 major kind of ports. The Indiana Harbor is actually our largest in terms of the tonnage moved, but however, the Port of Indiana Burns Harbor is huge as well, and the U.S. Steel facility in the city of Gary is also a major contributor to the maritime freight system. Looking at the pipeline system, this is one that we don't think about as much because it's underneath our feet, but it's still very important, as I mentioned before. It actually moves the most tonnage of freight material through our region. We have several that traverse our area. And then kind of putting it all together, this shows basically all of these modes of freight that I've talked about except for pipelines, because that would make the map look too cluttered. But clearly we have a and this also shows airports, which I haven't talked about yet. The largest, most significant one is the Gary-Chicago Airport. But clearly we have a lot of freight in a very multimodal system, moving goods through our region that keeps our economy going. So the freight chapter then looking at all of these layers of our existing conditions. What are the issues and needs? I'm not going to read through the needs, but I want to highlight some of these issues here. In terms of the economy, workforce shortages threaten our freight-dependent industries. In terms of the truck mode, the pavement condition does not meet state performance targets. Truck parking is either often in short supply or hard to find. The frequency of truck-involved crashes has been increasing recently. Some bridges with low clearance pose mobility concerns. In terms of the rail mode, at-grade crossings cause delay and safety concerns, and blocked crossings cause significant delays. There are also some drawbridges that are in poor condition. In terms of our maritime mode, maritime navigation is impacted by underinvestment in certain policies. In terms of kind of our multimodal, we just have a lack of international destinations at our airports, so that kind of impacts our air mode. Pipelines are the largest source of hazardous material spills by volume in our region, so that's a huge issue as well. Congestion caused by freight traffic traveling to from Chicago. There's a short supply of intermodal facilities to address these. Most of that has to go into the Illinois side. And in terms of kind of our climate and resilience aspects, extreme weather is a very disruptive impact to our freight system, and air emissions, as we know through our conformity issues that I've been talking about, remains a significant issue in contributing to ozone pollution in our region. And some areas are obviously exposed to a lot of heat-related noise and pollution. So we have a lot of issues that are impacted by freight in terms of all of these areas. Now kind of mapping out what these issues look like, kind of breaking these down by condition, safety, and mobility. So looking at the condition issues, this is showing the areas of our region where pavements are in poor condition and also where bridges are in poor condition, where the dots are. And then looking at the safety issues, these show truck and rail-related injuries and fatalities here on the dots on the map. So they're kind of clustered in the denser areas of the network, especially up in the Hammond and Gary areas. And then looking at mobility issues, these show the kind of congestion bottlenecks and the dark line there on I-8094, as well as low bridge clearances that pose an issue for truck navigation. So under 16 feet on the interstate and under 14 feet on the other national highway system links. And then this shows kind of the blocked crossing issue that we've talked about a lot at NERC, where we have a lot of at-grade rail crossing blockages. And looking at this map, this is kind of broken down by the train count as well as the density of crossing incidents. And it looks like the Hammond area really sticks out like a sore thumb, just in terms of how impacted it is. So putting all of this together, we're kind of pivoting now to the creating purpose part of the freight chapter. And so vision, goals, and objectives. We kind of took all of the existing conditions from the first part of this presentation that I talked about, and we took kind of federal goals, state level goals, and regional goals, and other goals, and kind of combined them together with the stakeholder input from our steering committee, as well as some of the outreach that CPCS conducted throughout the process of this plan, and we came up with a freight vision, which I'll go over next. So the freight vision in the NWI 2050 Plus is to support and strengthen regional economic growth and competitiveness with an accessible, connected, safe, and efficient freight transportation system while reducing environmental and community impacts. So this kind of follows, this vision follows from our HERS framework that will be adapted from NWI 2050, our last long-range plan. We added an E and an S, equitable and sustainable, to the connected, united, renewed, and vibrant principles as well. And so we came up with kind of 5 freight transportation goals, and we looked at their impacts in terms of these kind of 6 HERS framework principles. So in terms of the first goal, which is to stimulate economic competitiveness and growth, that kind of impacts the connected, united, renewed, vibrant, and equitable vision areas. The second goal, reduce and mitigate freight safety and security risks, impacts the vibrant and safe vision areas. The third goal, reduce and eliminate barriers to efficient mobility, impacts the renewed and vibrant vision areas. The fourth goal, maintain, preserve, and extend the service life of existing infrastructure, impacts the renewed and vibrant goals. And then finally, the fifth goal, preserve natural and community resources by reducing negative environmental impacts of freight activities, impacts the united and equitable vision areas. So now breaking these goals, we came up with objectives for each of these goals. So I'll just briefly kind of go into what the several objectives are. So the first goal, as I mentioned, is to stimulate economic competitiveness and growth. So the objectives that relate to this goal are to coordinate with economic development agencies, the Northwest Indiana Forum, Connexus Indiana, and basically other freight-related stakeholders to provide freight-related industries with relevant resources, including freight data, planning resources, and funding opportunities. The second objective in this goal is to collaborate with economic development agencies and educational institutions to advance training programs with the focus of freight industry workforce development. And the third objective is to identify and promote the development of land that is appropriate for freight-related industries. So all of these objectives are in service to the goal of kind of stimulating our economic competitiveness of our region to better position it to advance freight. The second goal is to reduce and mitigate freight safety and security risks. And so some of the objectives as relates to this goal are to reduce the incidence and severity of truck-involved crashes, to reduce the highway rail-grade crossing safety and trespass risks, to reduce the conflict between freight and active transportation modes, and to ensure that safety concerns are not disproportionately clustered in disadvantaged communities. The third goal, to reduce and eliminate barriers to efficient mobility. Some of the objectives and services of this goal are to reduce the number and duration of blocked crossings, to eliminate truck bottlenecks, to eliminate bridge clearance issues, to support dredging and ice breaking activities at our maritime facilities, and to support the development of intermodal, transload, and other multimodal facilities to handle goods. And the fourth goal, maintain, preserve, and extend the service life of existing infrastructure. Some of the objectives that relate to this goal are to maintain pavement and bridge condition in a state of good repair, to increase capacity and accessibility of truck parking, and to identify and address infrastructure condition issues disproportionately clustered in disadvantaged communities. Finally, our fifth goal in the freight chapter is to preserve natural and community resources by reducing the negative environmental impacts of freight activities. Some objectives as relate to this goal include support demonstration and deployment of technologies and strategies to reduce environmental impacts associated with freight activity, to conduct a hazardous materials commodity flow study to identify and mitigate the risks of spills on supply chain flows, communities, and the environment, and to conduct a regional infrastructure vulnerability study to identify and mitigate threats to system resiliency. That is something that we are also working on as well in other efforts. So now putting this kind of together and how to measure all these goals and objectives, we came up with a list of performance measures. And I'm not going to read the rationale column because that's really not important, but I'll read kind of what these performance measures are that we'll be looking to measure. So for the first goal, we'll be looking to measure the freight-dependent industry and employment and the volume and value of goods moved by each mode. For the second goal, we'll be looking to measure the truck-involved crashes and the rail crossing incidents. For the third goal, we'll be looking to measure the interstate travel time, truck travel time reliability index, the blocked crossing duration and frequency. For the fourth goal, we'll be looking to measure the percent of payments in good, fair, and poor condition. This is something we already measure, as well as the number of road bridges in poor condition. Again, we already measured that as well. And then for the fifth goal, we'll be looking to measure the national risk index. So now I'll touch on some of the policy study and research recommendations that the freight chapter touches on. This is kind of where now we've looked at all these conditions and how we're going to measure these goals and objectives, but what are we actually recommending here? So the first recommendation is to assist communities and stakeholders in identifying and applying for freight eligible funding. There's a lot of funding opportunities out there. First and foremost, that you're probably all aware of as the Technical Planning Committee is our NOFA process funding. So we'll try to strengthen freight in that and try to make it more relevant. We're going to be kind of going through each of the topical committees in the next couple of months to highlight that a little bit. But there are also a lot of discretionary grant opportunities. I'm not going to read all of these, but they're out there. And our goal as staff is to help all of our communities pursue these opportunities as well. Another recommendation that we have in our freight chapter is to develop freight-related workforce training programs. I kind of mentioned that earlier, but we want to actually put some teeth behind this and work with our stakeholders to kind of enhance this. We want to also investigate innovative technological solutions to improve freight, such as truck parking information management systems. These are like the blue signs that you see in some other states that show the number of parking spaces available. They're kind of making inroads into some regions in Indiana as well. Railroad highway crossing gate management systems. These would better inform kind of approaching vehicular traffic about where crossings are blocked and better communicate where those are to not only the vehicular traffic, but especially emergency management services. Looking at freight signal priority solutions, as well as another technological innovation we should explore. We should also fund or partner with INDOT to fund a truck parking study in our region, because we know that that impacts a lot of our communities. We should conduct more comprehensive corridor analysis studies. Some of the examples that are actually already ongoing are the Propel US 30 and 31 study, the US 41 study, which actually some of our staff will be meeting for a field visit this Thursday to look at some of the communities in Hammond, Highland, and Cherryville, and how what a corridor plan for US 41 might look like. We also want to improve the US 12 and 20 corridor traveling experience by rerouting truck movement away from US 12 to the extent possible. We want to preserve the recreational character of that corridor. And we also want to improve truck access to the Cleveland Cliffs Burns Harbor in order to reduce the queuing issue on US 12. That is a task force that was undertaken at NERC a little over 10 years ago now. So there are some recommendations there. We want to kind of breathe some more life into that. Some further policy study and research recommendations that we have are to assist communities to improve at-grade railroad crossings. This is always just kind of one that we're keeping our eye on. We want to consider reconvening the Rail Crossing Task Force that met a few years ago. It didn't get very far due to some constraints at the federal level in terms of the Surface Transportation Board, but it's worth exploring the possibility of reconvening it. We should consider working with the Gary Chicago International Airport and others to conduct an air cargo study. We should also expand upon the Northwest Indiana Economic Recovery and Resiliency Plan, which was adopted last year, to focus more on infrastructure resiliency. That didn't touch too much on infrastructure, but there's some opportunities to kind of incorporate this as maybe an addendum to that. And we should assist communities in better planning for freight by making available this plan's freight chapter's issues, needs, policy recommendations, and gap areas, and identifying opportunities to implement them. So now I'll talk about what those gap areas are that I just mentioned. So in this freight chapter, we looked at some of the project gaps between the recommendations that came out of this chapter and projects or efforts already undertaken or underway at NERC and stakeholders. And so we came up with kind of a list of topic areas and some potential projects around those. So the kind of issue areas that we looked at that were gaps were bridge clearance, toll booth inefficiency, noise pollution, at-grade rail crossing safety, bridge condition, safety issues with low-cost solutions, and traffic signals. So within each of these topic areas, we came up with example projects that are hypothetical, but that we kind of gave some examples of what their costs might look like. So here's in the topic area of bridge clearance, we looked at one example bridge on US 30. This is the Norfolk Southern Bridge over US 30 in Cherville. This clearly has a low bridge clearance. It's 14 foot 9 inches, and it's very narrow. There's no way that an active transportation or a bike or a pedestrian could get through this bridge either. So we estimated that to retrofit or replace this bridge would cost about $25 million. This is an example of that. According to our consultant. Looking at the topic area of toll booth inefficiency, we know that this causes a lot of issues on the Indiana Toll Road. So looking to go to either open road tolling or a toll by plate model. We estimate that it would cost about $50,000 to demolish each toll booth and about $1.5 million to basically for each toll booth to implement open road tolling for the gantry. And then it would cost about an ongoing operating fee of about 7 to 10 cents per tag that goes through to process. For the issue of noise pollution, we looked at the gap areas of the barrier walls on the I-94 corridor. And so we looked at kind of filling in these 5 locations with gap areas with noise barriers. And in total, we estimated the cost to be about $9.8 million. For the issue of at-grade rail crossing safety, we just took, there's so many examples of crossings that could be improved in our region. So we just it was hard to narrow down to just a couple candidates for grade separations. But we looked at 117th Street in Whiting at the CSX crossing because this kind of leads into the Wayhalla Beach area. So it's kind of a key corridor there. And then US 41, which is on the National Highway System on Calumet Avenue in Hammond. And each of these our cost estimates were about $60 million for the grade separation at 117th Street in Whiting and about $50 million on US 41 in Hammond. So, not cheap for sure. And then for the issue of bridge condition, we looked at, there was a handful of bridges that were in poor condition. We looked at some of the ones that were on key freight corridors. So this was an example on the connector between the toll road and Klein Avenue, State Road 912. So there are a lot of trucks that use this kind of ramp entrance, and there are 2 bridges on this little ramp entrance that are in poor condition. So we estimated that to replace these bridges would cost about $11 million collectively. And then in the topic area of safety issues with low-cost solutions, this is an example of US 20 out in rural LaPorte County. There are a lot of trucks that use this corridor to kind of avoid paying tolls on the Indiana Toll Road probably, but it's also just kind of a link between Michigan City and South Bend. But to install advanced curve warning signs, high friction surface treatments, and clearing and grubbing an intersection here on US 20 and County Road 300 East would cost about a hard cost estimate of only about $55,000 to do these types of things that can make a difference in safety. And then in the topic area of traffic signals, we looked at we didn't come up with any tangible examples of where these signal candidates will be. We just kind of committed to working with our communities and identifying these locations in the future, but looking to, the cost estimate of 4 poles with mast arms, 1 controller, cable communications, and other standard equipment would be about $350,000 to $500,000 per traffic signal. And we would kind of work with our communities to identify locations that would pass these signal warrants and be on freight corridors. So with that, are there any questions? I know that was a lot of information, but just want to go through our chapter. George?
I saw in the news that Ohio has a case going before Supreme Court on railroad crossings.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared to ask specific questions, but do you have any information on how that's going?
That is a good point. I do briefly mention it in the chapter about how we need to pay attention to how that might impact, and also kind of make more relevant, like I said, reconvening our rail task force. But I've not personally heard any developments about how that's going yet, but it could potentially have a huge impact on how communities would be able to regulate the railroads in terms of their.
Side note, Sanderson Road, I tried that frequently. And I know we've had problems with trying to get that done in the past. Is there any future consideration on that? The same as the road bridge, it's one lane.
Yeah, I would defer to.
There's always consideration, but we need to cooperate.
And that's been a problem in the past.
It doesn't need to be in the future, but that's the reality of what we've been dealing with since the beginning. I would be remiss to not mention the issue with the bridge design, and not to put the burden on INDOT, but we had a discussion in our last full commission meeting about bridge approaches that I think there's probably a low point for drainage to help with that. The problem is it is shaking up the truck drivers and the freight industry for the trucking industry. They hit those things and they're not smooth for the transition. I was hoping that LTAP or Purdue University would step up with INDOT and help with a redesign in order to alleviate the damage that's being done to the trucking industry. I just wanted to bring that up because that's one of the things we were mentioning, the height or clearance of bridges. We have the other issue with the smoothness of the transition on the bridges. And it's an engineering specification issue, I think, that could be modified, I hope. And that's in the hands of others as well.
So that's a really good point. I don't believe we addressed that, but
Please make a note of it.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's any other industry or state level funding on the horizon similar to what was offered by the state a couple of years back to eliminate at-grade crossings and do overpasses?
As far as state level, that I don't know. My impression was that there were a lot of issues and overruns associated with the state-funded program, so that may not be reauthorized. I don't want to say it won't be, but that I'm not aware of at this time. But it would be, I know we would all benefit tremendously as our region disproportionately was awarded last round. So,
Mr. Vasquez.
Well, I actually have 2 questions. Number one, dealing with the toll booth.
yeah.
It's 4 only, basically, yes.
Kind of. Technically,
It's kind of a complicated issue, granted. What incentive would they have to upgrade? Would they be partnering with us in the cost of this upgrade to make it more efficient? Let's face it, they're there for profit, not for upgrades.
Well, again, these illustrative, I should have used the word illustrative to describe these examples even more. It's not that we have identified concrete steps that we have already taken or even necessarily explored taken from kind of a partnership opportunity. So you're right, there will be some challenges there with identifying how to do that.
Okay, second question. In regards to the railroad crossings, things of this nature, you brought up the Ohio incident.
Supreme Court.
that you better believe it. So not only would a family to maybe address to, like, say, a Canadian National or something, they're big outfits, let's face it, they're just small and they're okay. But to prevent them having more money paid out in the long run from, say, a family as well as a community, or the state in the process of litigation, are they also taking in money in order to upgrade these things and let it know in their best interest to do so?
So, I mean, I think that, I don't know much about the railroads themselves. I don't know if many of us do, but I would think that depending on the outcome of that Supreme Court case, that will have huge implications on some of the liability kind of basically damages that can be assumed by that victim. So,
Yeah, so I think I can just jump in. As Scott said, a lot of these projects that are discussed in the freight chapter of the 2050 plus document are, as he said, illustrative. So these are things that emerged from conversations with the advisory committee that they've identified. These are the issues and these are some potential solutions. But we're really sort of at the beginning of that process of, okay, now that we've identified these potential solutions, we would need to go out and meet with stakeholders, meet with, in the case of at Great Crossing, you'd have to, have further conversations with the railroad themselves. Typically, the cost of a grade separation is usually borne by the local government rather than the freight operator, simply because
There is an element in state statute whereby the railroads are required to participate in some of the cost, a small percentage, only 5% of a grade separation.
That's a good point. We have to remember they're private corporations. They've been exempt from a lot of the rules as time has gone by. It's creation of a lot of new practices. And I see them participating more in the future as long as it has a positive impact on their business. And I think it will. That's why we have a lot of this discussion. Everybody in the region forgets about the economic impact of freight and the handling of this freight. The pipelines that were brought up by Scott 20 years ago, state government actually put an new emphasis on pipelines, called it pipe drains. It was a plan to expand the use of the pipelines. Same with the railways. I think a lot of us get real frustrated because we're held up in crossings, but the reality is the railways have been here for over 100 years, and they've taken advantage of their seniority, but also the fact that they contribute so much to the local economy. So hopefully we can continue the dialogue and improve that relationship. So maybe we can look at a little bit more of an investment. As Jeff pointed out, 5% really is a drop when you consider the expenses of managing this infrastructure. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I was waiting for you.
You're letting me last, that's fine. One, as an advisory board member, I want to congratulate Scott and the team that supported him during this process on a job well done. It was not an easy task to manage a lot of the advisory board members like myself. But there were a couple things that I wanted to just kind of comment on, and I'll follow up with Scott later. I'm not going to ask you to answer all these questions off the top of your head. The 38% of the pipeline carrying freight figure that's in the document currently is going to exponentially grow. In part because of the fact that we are the owners of 5 very difficult to decarbonize industries as it relates to carbon emissions and climate change and air quality situations. So we will be seeing an increase in carbon capture and ultimate storage, which will occur via pipeline. So that is significantly going to grow. I do want to follow up with Scott later on the largest source of hazardous spills volume on your slide 14. Just want to get some more detail on that, and also on the hazardous material commodity flow study status. And ironically, I just got asked about Propel 30, but the person didn't know the name of the study, just the Route 30 study. So I'm glad you had it in your slide so I can come after you to get more information on that. So, and yes, as Tom and Scott have both said, when we came up with these ideas, it was kind of like dream big. We didn't pipe dream, but we dreamed big, and we didn't have all the answers. So we put Scott out there on the end of the tall diving board without any water underneath him on some of these things. But we can get there. So congratulations, guys.
Yes, and I appreciate the committee's work on this. People have no idea what we have out there and how valuable of an asset this is.
We take everything for
to
granted.
us. We do. We do. So any other comments or questions? Just a reminder, they don't call us a crossroads for nothing.
That's right.
So thank you, Tom. Or Scott. And thank you, Tom, too.
Don't forget Charles.
And we had a few guests drop in. Mr. Wright, will you introduce yourself?
David Wright, Great Public Transportation Corporation.
Iman. And
Terry
Mr.
Martin, Terry and Gable, come.
Thank you. And I know Andy Vasquez, he's a Porter County Councilman, sitting in the back. Thank you for coming. Thank all of you. Next, we have the NERC, SWRPC Cooperative Accord for the Coordination of Land Use and Transportation Planning in the Michigan portion of the Michigan City, LaPorte, Indiana, Michigan urban area. And Mr. Vanderbilt is going to present on that.
Yes, I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm just going to give you a verbal report here. NERC is the MPO for the Indiana portion of the Chicago, Illinois, Indiana urban area, as well as the Indiana portion of the Michigan City, LaPorte, Indiana, Michigan urban area. Every urban area is required to have an MPO that oversees the sort of a cooperative planning process. NERC, as I said, is an MPO that manages one portion of two urban areas. Because we are working on bi-state urban areas, we maintain planning agreements with our neighbor metropolitan planning organizations. That would be CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning in Illinois, and the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission in Michigan. So after the 2020 census, we reviewed our existing planning agreements with these two MPOs and updated we've updated them based on the new census information that we have. Probably the biggest change in the Michigan City portion in our agreement with the state of Michigan is that the Michigan City, LaPorte, Indiana, Michigan urban area grew pretty extensively in the Michigan area. So what we've done is essentially just updated an existing agreement that is in effect to reflect the change in that urban area and the growth in that urban area. The document itself is on page 4 of the agenda packet if you'd like to review it. I'll just call your attention really to the 4th paragraph, sort of in the middle of the page. This is the primary modification that we made to this agreement. You'll see that we adjusted the area and the population within that Michigan portion of the urban area. So that's really the major change that we've made. As I said, we maintained an existing agreement, and this is really just an update to that agreement.
Our first agreement with Southwest Michigan was around 2006 with the expansion of what we call the Wing Spread Accord of cooperating and working with the regional planning organizations in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and of course, Arbs in Northwest Indiana. What I need today is action, a recommendation to the commission.
I would make a recommendation for 3.2 to be recommended positively.
A favorable recommendation?
Favorable.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do I have a second? Mr. Wright seconds. Any other discussion? Okay.
I've been living under a rock. I didn't realize that Southwest Michigan is an air quality non-attainment zone because LaPorte County isn't for us, correct?
As far as I know.
It's historically, it was, right, technically, it's a maintenance area for another several months. Sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, not in maintenance, but that might be very,
That's fine if they want to be a non-attainment area. Businesses coming to us.
I'd have to check the staff
Okay.
definition.
All right, thank you.
Was there any comments by the Michigan State Report, UA?
The Michigan. So the UA is represented by NERC, so we are the UA. We have developed this update in coordination with Southwest Michigan Planning Commission. So we're asking that this be adopted December 7th by our commission, and they're slated to adopt it on December 19th.
So it is cooperative. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, I mean, just similar as far as with the UZA potential changes when you met with ourselves in the field, I mean, did you meet individually with Michigan City and the board? I mean, or is this just discussion today intended to be a meeting?
We didn't meet with Michigan City or LaPorte because they have no real direct involvement in this, in the sense that they don't have their governance doesn't address this type of an agreement. It's really an MPO by state agreement.
Point of order, Marion County, Michigan is not a team. I guess that would perhaps be relevant for a black state.
A good question and good advice, Kate.
I mean, it doesn't impact us.
No.
I've just had never heard that fact about that part of Michigan.
Any other comments or questions? We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? So moved. Let's go into programming. 4.1 Resolution 2314, adopting the Title 6 program update on page 6. Stephen Hughes is going to make the presentation. We'd like an action after the presentation of recommending to the commission for the December 7th meeting.
Right. So, thank you. The Title VI program is something that maybe not everybody's super familiar with. It's part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is the non-discrimination in the use of federal funding section. So that is something that deals with race, color, national origin, and it's also been expanded over the years through executive orders and updates to law to address a little bit broader categories, including environmental justice categories. So why are we updating this program? It's required by the Federal Transit Administration to update this periodically, but also, more importantly to our activity, is it helps us better program the money that is provided. Also, as you all know, with elections, our membership of the commission changes. Also, some of those appointees end up changing, and our committees change over time. So part of this is the demographic profile that we get to represent to the FTA, that we are representing our community well. And then lastly, it helps our subrecipients to update their Title VI programs as well. So you might ask, well, what changes in this? And mostly what happens in this particular update is that this was an update to address the demographic changes and make sure that that is up to date. There's no real policy or procedural updates in this update of the Title VI program. Perhaps future updates, we may decide to be a little more broad with it, but that will be in part due to future guidance from the FTA and how our programming works over the next 3 or 4 years. And so again, the next item, the next thing this will do is head to the commission, and so of course we're asking for a favorable recommendation to the commission. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and address those.
Questions or comments?
I'll move to make a favorable recommendation to the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Nelson, second. Any other questions, comments?
I do have a question. Is the fact that we are on YouTube today somewhat in response to enhancing your Title VI activities?
I think that
I want to say that was a previous public participation plan, but there is some kind of.
And the public participation plan is a part of the attachments that we send to the FTA for this. So
are these
they're related.
Are these YouTubes recorded and available on your website?
Yeah, every single public meeting that NERC has is live streamed on YouTube, and it's on YouTube out there for as long as YouTube exists.
Thank you.
What major minorities did you identify? Were there any changes in those?
I'll say the response rate was not high for our survey. So I think we made a good faith effort to identify the minorities on our boards and committees, but I think it's probably not as representative as we would like it to be. Part of that also is with the way that our MPO is structured, with elected officials being the required members of certain bodies that we have as the MPO. That's going to impact how representation of their community is shown. Other MPOs have the ability to make selections of people that are interested in participating. Ours is tied to state law, saying it has to be your elected officials. So it's always going to be a little bit different probably than a true census data. Okay, does this come pretty close?
Did you do a comparison to the census data?
The census data is in here, yes.
Okay. Was there a big shift in the census data anywhere in any of your communities?
Not significant enough that you'd be surprised by it.
I'd like to sit down with you in the future because I'm doing a lot of work on EJ, and obviously outreach and communication is a challenge for anybody and everybody, and if they say it's not, they're lying through their teeth. I'd like to share some of my learnings with you and hear back from you as well. So maybe after the holidays.
Yes.
Through December.
And we always appreciate working with the board. We've got mutual interests that we can cover. Thank you, Kate.
It's a two-way street. I'll benefit too.
Only if both parties agree to it.
We don't always have to.
Well, we don't agree, we don't have to agree, but at least we have to
Get
agree
together.
to meet
Yes.
for the benefit of the public at large, which is great. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Do we have any topic or committee reports today? Jen Birchfield. Why don't you start us with EMPC Coastal Watershed Hazards Resiliency Needs Assessment Update?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. No PowerPoint for you, just gonna give you a little bit of an update. My name's Jen Birchfield, I'm the Natural Resources Planner here at NERC. I wanted to chat with you a little bit today about a tool that NERC has developed in partnership with the Indiana DNR Lake Michigan Coastal Program. This is a natural hazards resiliency needs assessment designed for communities. Primarily, our contract is to work with communities in the coastal watershed, in the Lake Michigan watershed of Northwest Indiana. But really, I think it's a valuable tool for anyone throughout the 3 counties to really just take a look at their communities, their local government, and how prepared they are for natural disasters, for natural hazards. The purpose of this tool is really twofold. One is that we certainly hope it will be a useful exercise for your community in just doing a gut check of where you are with resiliency and preparation. And I think from the communities that have completed the tool so far, the general feedback has been, yes, it was a useful tool. Some of the questions triggered us to identify the location of certain documents or who in our municipality has the knowledge that pertains to this. So it's meant to kind of give you a sense of where you are, where you might want to look at improving a little bit. The other intent is that Indiana DNR Lake Michigan Coastal Program does have some resources available for, many of you might be familiar with their coastal grants, but they also have some funding and resources available to provide assistance, technical assistance to communities to improve their resiliency efforts. So the results of this survey, we're not going to rank you against each other. We're not going to grade you and say, this community got an A and this one got a C. Nothing like that. Your specific municipality will not be mentioned by name in the summary report, but we're just looking across the region, all of the communities that do complete this assessment, so that we can say, hey, coastal program, for the questions pertaining to erosion practices along roadways and streams, most of the communities needed assistance on that, or most of the communities didn't. We also certainly hope, I can't tie this to specific pots of funding that you're going to get for completing this. However, the intention is that, you've probably seen a lot of these federal funding opportunities coming down the pike for resiliency initiatives. And so hopefully by completing this assessment, you'll become familiar with some of those funding opportunities. There are even some that are tied to funding that if you don't have a certain type of emergency plan adopted in your community, you may not be eligible for certain funding sources through, say, FEMA for an emergency. So that's kind of an overview of the intention of the assessment. The assessment does really deal with coastal hazards. So don't be scared. When I say coastal, that doesn't mean you need to be a Lake Michigan shoreline community. So we do deal with some of those things, such as shoreline erosion, coastal storms that are going to directly impact shoreline communities, but also for our further inland communities. It also deals with things such as fluvial erosion, so basically stream bank erosion where you have major erosion that might undermine roads, houses, property, things of that nature. Certainly another big one in our communities is flooding. So several of the questions do pertain to flooding. Let's see if I'm missing anything else in your question here.
I do.
Yes.
For the unincorporated areas such as Union Township, we don't have a city or a town, so we're under the Porter County
Yes.
umbrella. So should we be filling out an assessment, or is it done through the county only?
I would say the assessment will probably be done. We're shooting to get it done at the county level, and I would encourage. I think it would make a lot of sense for Union Township to participate in that process. There are some questions in this assessment that do pertain to how well you're coordinating among jurisdictions, because Salt Creek, for example, goes through Porter County, but then also through Valpo and other communities, so that cross-jurisdiction coordination. I would also say that, the extent of NERC's contract with Coastal Program to encourage communities to complete this and to provide assistance to them in completing this, we're happy to come out and do a 1 or 2 hour sit-down with your team to work through it. That is for the local government agencies in Northwest Indiana. Union Township, not specifically, but we would absolutely be happy to work with you if you think it would be useful for your community to work through
And
the
we had some
assessment.
serious flooding issues.
Yes.
With the major road coming through and things of that nature, plus the lake, Lake Louise.
Yes.
For clarity, the coastal program has a pretty well-defined
But
area.
we're included in that area.
Well, not
Are
exactly.
we not?
I believe
There's
that
a
you might be a
small portion.
bordering community.
Well, I
Lake
remember when
Louise
we
is-
were putting into a grant several years ago, that we were included.
Okay, Lake Louise is included, is in, I think you guys are right there at that border, the boundary goes kind of along Valparaiso,
But
Valparaiso Marine.
I think the best thing to
You
do
do
is, see, yeah. Well, I was on the inaugural coastal program for about 6 years. And we pretty much defined geographically because we had to limit where that area was. And in the end, the state took the recommendations partly, and they made their own box. So there's a lot of the area, for example, the lakes north of Valpo, which you'd think would be part of the coastal area, are not. There are just areas that I don't want to say they were excluded, but there was more of an emphasis on closer to Lake Michigan and the direct impact. So you don't use Salt Creek south of Valpo, and actually its origins are over by Expo Center all the way on the
We
east
can
side.
get a clarification on
Sure.
that.
Sure, so we do have a map, and I'll share this with you after. We do have a map showing the official boundaries of the Lake Michigan Coastal Program, which are what they are. That being said, some of our communities are, part of them are in the Lake Michigan watershed and part are out. We would still encourage them to complete the assessment, and we're happy to sit down and work with them. They're a part of our scope of work with this contract. Porter County, all of the 3 counties have portions within and outside of the watershed. We would encourage them to complete the assessment for the entirety of their geography. And finally, I will just reiterate that while our contract and our main scope of work is for the coastal program, because that's who's funding the work, we as NERC would still sit down with communities that are further in South County because we think it's a valuable tool. And so we'd like to see everyone, and I think it's just as valuable a tool for communities outside of the watershed as it is for those in the watershed.
For the hydrology too, we're not disinterested. We want to know what the impact is of, you mentioned drainage, how that's going to impact Lake Michigan in the end. Albeit we might not have the ability to get grants specific to that for this program, but there are other programs. So they're not going to ignore that information. They'll just add it all with the other information. More significant, I think, from this resiliency is the fact that people don't realize Lake Michigan, Indiana is only coastal, or Northwest Indiana is the only coastal part of Indiana. We're on the north coast. So we actually do have flood hazard areas, coastal flood hazard areas. And there's become more of an emphasis with FEMA and some of the other agencies on the protection and efforts to protect the lake at the north end for true coastal communities, but we still observe the land management practices south of the lake and their impacts.
And the way that the assessment is really broken down, there are a series of topical areas that a community might address. And if you do not have Lake Michigan shoreline, 3 of those are going to be NA for you. So you're halfway done with the assessment. But for some of the communities that are directly on the lakefront, they might find all of those questions to be useful.
And as most of you know, coastal communities have been desperate. Beverly Shores did a very extensive project just to protect the roads, pipelines, utilities, if not the houses on their north end.
And there are funding opportunities out there, some emerging ones, building resilient infrastructure in communities. I believe a proposal was recently put in on behalf of some of our shoreline communities. So there are different, funding opportunities out there through FEMA, through other federal programs as well. I will just kind of give a last plug of really encourage you if your community has not yet completed this. It's not as painful as you think. It looks like a long assessment, but I think on average, most communities might take about 2 hours to complete the assessment. We're happy to come out. Best way to do it is if you have a team of different departments. We don't expect that one single person in most communities is going to have all of this knowledge. So assemble your stormwater staff, your transportation staff, your planning staff, your engineering staff, work through this assessment. Should take about an hour, maybe a little bit of follow-up. We are at the point now, NERC is about to shift to compiling a preliminary report to Coastal Program on the assessments that have been completed to date. We are looking to get that preliminary report to them by the end of the year. So if you're one of those communities that has maybe started this or had one meeting with us and just has a few things left to do, encourage you to try to get that into us in the next few weeks so we can include you in the summary report. However, this grant, this contract that we're under, does go into next year. So if you aren't able to complete it this year, we'll be updating the report as we receive additional assessments.
And I should mention that Kankakee River Basin Development Commission is also doing resiliency planning for all of the watershed in our 8 counties in Indiana. So we're just taking the first steps toward that. We've met probably a half dozen times now with state and federal authorities, particularly with the federal authorities, and working with our EMA directors across our region to help us design that, to help them manage when we have a tragedy or some major issue.
I would just like to point out that Northwest Indiana learned a very valuable lesson during the last high water period with the lake, because we were not eligible for FEMA dollars to assist in any communities because they were missing baseline background information. And so if a shoreline community is not responding to GEN, and you live there, you may want to call someone and say, why aren't we? Because as Kevin mentioned, Beverly put a lot of money into, bolstering their shoreline, and it had to come out of their pockets because we didn't know those rules about FEMA. So the water will rise again with or without climate change. So get our ducks in a row.
Thank you, Kay. Yep, that's an excellent point. The water cycles are cyclical and they come and go, but sometimes our memories are a little shorter. So hopefully we remember and get prepared. Other examples of certain FEMA plans that need to be in place for a community in order to be eligible. So really, as some of the questions in this assessment do pertain to that you can go through and say, hey, I don't know if we have that, or I don't think we have that. Maybe we need to look into it a little more.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Drive Clean Indiana.
I don't believe they're here. He did send me an email that they are watching online today, though.
Okay. Hi, guys. Text Kevin if you have any questions. Do we have any other technical committee reports today? Anybody at all? Iman?
Good morning, everyone. The Land Use Committee met on November 15th and we had some discussions, but the main highlight of the meeting that we, in an effort to improve the NOFA applications, which is the Land Use Committee is responsible for all the planning applications and also the quality of life applications. So we went, we just went through the questions and to check if we need to make some changes, or if we need to change the score, or if we need to add any sort of mapping and other questions. Also, we decided to have a standalone application for all the transit-oriented development projects, either planning or implementation. And that will be reviewed in the next meeting in January. All the modifications for the applications that we discussed, and also we will be taking the new applications of the TOT to review it with the committee members. So that was the main highlight.
Any other comments, questions? I would like to thank Charles Brasky for leading the effort in the notice of funding availability and kind of sitting in on all those committee meetings. People have no idea how many different parts there are moving. And Charles keeps structure to all of this. I really appreciate that. We have announcements of meetings coming up, finance and personnel, and the full commission meeting will be December 7th. And our next technical planning committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, January 9th, 2024 at 10 a.m. Anything else good for the cause?
Legislative session starts January 8th and is supposed to be run by March 8th. Legislators are promising us fast and furious. So if something pops up in your world, make sure you talk to someone about it. You may have 24 hours to be able to influence.
Good point. Because I think this is going to be extremely fast. If not, I'll have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So moved. Thank you all for coming.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.
No.